Good afternoon. Well, ahead of the BRICS Head of State Summit next week, the organization Human Rights Watch says that the Chinese government, and in fact Chinese society, is doing nothing to prevent anti-black racism on social media in China. The organization says there are many public incidents of racism there, where people make racist comments. In some cases, even in one or two state events, Chinese actors have actually worn makeup and pretended to be black and from Africa. Yachi Wang is a senior researcher at the Asia Division at Human Rights Watch. Yachi, good afternoon to you. What kind of anti-black racism are we seeing in China? What examples can you point to?
Well, all kinds of examples, but I would, anti-black racism exists everywhere in the world. But I would raise, I think, two kind of quite distinct patterns of racism in China. One is really points at, the partnership between Chinese women and black men. So there's just so much hate towards Chinese women who have partners of black men. A lot of like Chinese women, social media users, they post pictures with their black boyfriend, and those women are targeted terribly, and they are accused of selling out the Chinese race, contaminating the Chinese race, things like that. The other really are the type of portraying black people as poor. They are backward. They need the help of the Chinese people and the Chinese people in Africa who are providing them jobs, housings. So those two are quite prevalent.
Is this something that is almost considered normal to see this on social media? It's almost as if the people who post these things believe everyone in China agrees with them. That's why they do it.
Yes, I think the reason they post it is because it's very popular. The reason it's very popular is because, that's a shared sentiment. I think, this, I would say, the Chinese internet is kind of its own isolated space. It's 1.4 billion people. It's huge, but it's largely cut off from the rest of the world. The Chinese people use its own, has its own versions of Twitter and Facebook. And just the amount of the extremity of racism there that are not well known in the rest of the world, because the Chinese people, they write in the Chinese language using their own social media platforms.
And the idea that, this can be given, I suppose the word would be legitimacy by what the government does. So if the government has a Chinese person wearing makeup and acting as if they're a black person, that almost allows this kind of racism to happen, right? This is the problem. What you see in the official world is reflected also in China in the social media world.
Absolutely. The Chinese government does so much propaganda to its people, saying, we're doing all these investments in Africa because Africans are poor, they are backward, they don't know how to do business, they are lazy. So those messages are kept being sent to the Chinese people. That's, contributed to the extremity of racism on the Chinese internet. I think these two are definitely related.
The issue around the Chinese internet, as you refer to it, and of course you're correct, it is sort of a different system in a way to what we see when we're connected to what I suppose would be the Western-dominated internet. But in particular, we know that the Chinese government censors things. If someone is critical of the Chinese Communist Party or is critical of the government, that post gets deleted very quickly. Is that happening to racist posts on social media in China at all? The Chinese government has the capacity to censor. Is it stopping these posts?
Exactly. I think that's the problem. We must understand, the issue in the context that the Chinese internet is extremely censored. Each social media platforms, the major ones, they'll have thousands or tens of thousands of content moderators whose job is to censor content that is critical of the Chinese government, but they do very little to censor the extreme racist content on the internet. Even, in their community guidelines, they say, we don't tolerate racism, but they don't do much. And also, I don't think the Chinese government is telling these platforms to censor racist content.
Do you think the moderators don't realize it's wrong? Could the problem be that deep?
Well, I think so, because, as I said, the reason they're just this level of amount and extremity is because it's popular. The reason it's popular is because a lot of people share this sentiment. And I have to say, there are Chinese academics, journalists, intellectuals are critical of this kind of racist content on the internet. They wanted to raise the issue but those people's voice are not being promoted, and oftentimes they are censored on the Chinese internet.
So on the one side, we have the Chinese government, which promotes itself in Africa, in our continent here, as a country that is trying to help Africa develop, trying to help African countries develop. It sort of it claims that it's helping people. And yet in China, the people, it's doing nothing to stop people who have a completely different view. There's this very strange sort of thing happening here. Do you think China's government understands that anti-black racism is wrong?
Well, this is a very, very good question. I mean, China has, always saying, we and Africa are, together in solidarity against anti-colonial racism that are, promoted and perpetrated by the Western society. But at the same time, if you read the Chinese government's own propaganda, especially towards its own people in Chinese language, that, a lot of people who don't speak Chinese, who don't pay attention, don't really know, you can kind of see the undertone of how they think of Africans, like they're poor, they're backward, they don't work as hard as the Chinese people. So even in Chinese government official propaganda, you can kind of see that kind of undertone behind their thinking and their doing.
This must end up reflecting towards and reflecting in the real world towards black people who are living in China. I mean, that must be very tough for them.
Oh, absolutely. I've spoken to many black people in China. They've told me, a lot of stories of discrimination against them. They say, literally the landlord told them that I'm not renting this apartment to you is because you're a black person. And they're being told the reason you're not getting this job, even, English is a native language, is because you're a black person. We only hire white person. So those are the very blatant discrimination they are experiencing in China.
Yachi Wang, thank you very much indeed, a senior researcher for the Asia Division of Human Rights Watch. Really do appreciate the time. Very interesting discussion to see what is happening in China and on social media in China.